I never planned on becoming the man who broke a town in half. Looking back, I don't even know what I was chasing. Maybe the kind of certainty that makes you feel taller than you really are. But certainty can be a dangerous thing, and mine came crashing down the night I swung a hammer at what my neighbors called holy. It was late, the square already dark, except for the dim glow of the streetlights. The statue stood there like it always had, Our Lady of Guadalupe, her colors faded, but her presence somehow heavier than the stone she was carved from. Folks used to leave flowers at her feet, candles too. Me? I saw an idol. That's what I told myself. I preached it from the pulpit, thunder in my chest, fire in my words. Tear down your false gods, worship only the Lord. And yet, when I lifted that hammer, my hands shook like they knew better than my head did. The cedar cracked with the first blow, and the sound still haunts me. It wasn't the sharp snap of wood. It was deeper, like something tearing loose inside me. I struck again and again, each hit heavier than the last. By the time it was over, her face lay in pieces on the stone steps. I told myself I'd done God's work, that I'd freed my town from superstition. But when I looked up, the silence of the square wasn't victory, it was grief. The next morning, the whispers had already spread. People didn't look me in the eye at the diner. Mothers pulled their kids a little closer as I walked past. Old men shook their heads like they'd just watched someone lose his mind. Even my own church felt different, quieter, emptier, like my words no longer carried weight. I tried to stand tall behind the pulpit, but my voice betrayed me. The congregation had shrunk to half its size within a week. Those who stayed didn't say much. They just listened with heavy eyes, waiting for me to make sense of what I'd done. But I couldn't. At home, things weren't better. My daughter Emma had fallen sick around the same time. Fever, coughing, nights where Sarah and I sat by her bed just to hear her breathe. I prayed harder than ever, begging God to heal her, to show me some sign I hadn't lost everything. But the heavens stayed quiet. Sarah never said it out loud, but I could see it in her eyes. She wondered if my crusade, my pride, had cursed our home. I wondered too. One afternoon I sat slumped on the church steps, head in my hands, when Mrs. Valdez shuffled up beside me. She's one of those women who carries more faith in her fingertips than we managed to muster in all my sermons. She didn't scold me, didn't even look angry. Instead, she pressed something into my palm. A rosary. Its beads were worn smooth, like they'd soaked up years of whispered prayers. I can't take this, I muttered, trying to hand it back. You already have, she said, her voice calm but firm. I wanted to protest, but she kept talking. She forgives, Pastor, even when we don't ask, even when we think we're right. I couldn't find any words. She just laid a hand on my arm, gentle but steady. If you can't pray, just hold it. It isn't about saying perfect words. It's about trust. Then she left me there, staring down at those beads like they were alive. That night, I sat in the dark by Emma's bed. I didn't kneel, didn't speak, didn't try to wrestle words from my throat. I just held that rosary and let the beads slip through my fingers one by one. And as I did, memories I thought I'd buried rose up. My grandmother lighting candles when my grandfather was sick. My mother whispering prayers over her sister's faded photo. A tiny medal slipped into my lunchbox when I left for Bible college with a note saying, "She'll watch over you." All those women who had loved me quietly without needing to win arguments or prove points. Their faith wasn't about tearing things down. It was about holding on when everything else was falling apart. The weight of that memory didn't crush me, it ached, but in a way that made me long for something pure I'd forgotten. Later that night, Emma stirred in her sleep. Her lips moved, barely audible. Sarah leaned close and whispered, "What did she say?" Emma smiled faintly, still asleep. "The lady in blue. She said Daddy's not alone anymore." My chest tightened. I closed my eyes, clutching that rosary like it was the only thing keeping me upright, and for the first time in a long while, A crack of light slipped through the armor I'd wrapped around myself. Days passed, but the pedestal in the square haunted me. I avoided it, walking on the far side of the street, but each time I passed, my chest ached. The empty space where the statue had stood wasn't just about stone and cedar. It was me, stripped down, scarred, waiting. By Friday morning, I couldn't ignore it anymore. I put on a clean shirt, pressed my slacks, slipped the rosary into my pocket. Sarah handed me a bundle of flowers, daisies and lilies, the kind my mother loved. She didn't say anything, but her eyes held me like a prayer. When I reached the park, people noticed right away. Whispers followed me. "He's coming back. What's he doing?" My legs felt heavy as I walked toward the pedestal, and when I reached it, I couldn't stand anymore. I knelt. No speeches, no thunder, just me placing flowers on the bare stone, whispering words only God could hear. My shoulders shook, my throat tightened, but I stayed there, not in pride, but in surrender. Behind me I heard footsteps. Mrs. Valdez knelt beside me, then another woman, then another. Soon a small circle formed. No accusations, no sermons, just presence. The statue was still gone, broken pieces scattered, who knows where. But in that moment, something had returned. Not carved in wood, not painted in color, but living in the hearts of people who chose grace over anger. And as I rose to my feet, I saw their faces, no longer burning with judgment, but softened, cautious, almost hopeful. The cedar couldn't be unbroken, but maybe, just maybe, something deeper could be mended. I thought the hardest part was over the day I knelt at that empty pedestal, but the truth is, what came afterward cut even deeper. You can smash wood and stone in an instant, but rebuilding trust, that takes time, and sometimes it feels like you'll never get it back. The Sunday after I laid those flowers, I walked into church expecting the pews to be bare again. To my surprise, more people showed up than I'd seen in weeks. They didn't look eager, though. Their faces carried the same kind of wary caution folks wear when they test thin ice on a pond. I stood at the pulpit, hands shaking, and for the first time in my life as a preacher, I didn't thunder or shout. I just told the truth. "I broke something in this town," I said, "not just a statue. I broke your faith in me, and I don't know how to fix it. All I can do is ask God to work on me the way I should have let him all along." The silence that followed nearly crushed me, but then I saw Mrs. Valdez bow her head. A few others followed. It wasn't applause or forgiveness, but it was enough to keep me standing. At home, Emma's sickness still weighed on us. Some nights she burned with fever, other nights she whispered about that lady in blue. Sarah held onto her tighter than ever, and I clung to that rosary like it was a lifeline. I didn't understand the words of the prayers, but I found myself fingering the beads, letting them run through my hands, until I felt calmer, steadier. Sometimes I even whispered the Hail Mary, stumbling over the words, but meaning every syllable. It wasn't a tea about crossing into a new religion. It was about reaching for hope in the only way that made sense anymore. One evening I sat with Emma as she drifted off to sleep, her small hand wrapped around my finger, weak but warm. "Daddy," she murmured, "the lady says I'll be okay." My throat tightened. I wanted to believe her with all my heart. I kissed her forehead and told her I loved her more than anything. The following week, something remarkable happened. A group of townspeople began collecting the broken pieces of the statue. Some came from backyards where kids had picked them up, others from storage where the city had dumped the remains. Piece by piece, they brought them together. One afternoon, they carried the fragments into the church hall, laying them on a table like bones waiting to be mended. I stared at them for a long time. The cracked face, the chipped robe, the shattered hands. I thought about how my own life felt the same way, splintered, incomplete, waiting for something beyond me to make it whole again. A carpenter named Luis, a quiet man who usually kept to himself, offered to restore the statue. "It will not be perfect," he said softly, "but maybe it can still stand." His words pierced me. I realized he wasn't only talking about wood, he was talking about me too. While Luis worked, the town began to soften. People who once crossed the street to avoid me now stopped long enough to nod. Some even spoke, asking about Emma, offering food for Sarah, bringing soup or bread. I had never felt so small in their eyes, yet never so cared for either. Humility was teaching me what pride never could. Then came the night everything shifted. Emma had been weak all day, barely touching her food. Sarah and I sat by her bed, holding on to each other in silence. Around midnight, I heard her whisper again, her lips forming words without effort. "Mama, Daddy, she's here." Sarah looked at me with tears streaming down her face. "Who, baby?" she asked gently. "The lady in blue," Emma said with the faintest smile. "She says don't be afraid." Something inside me broke wide open. I buried my face in my hands and wept like a child. I wasn't weeping for guilt anymore. I was weeping because for the first time, I felt like Grace had walked into our house and sat down beside us. Days later, Emma's fever finally broke. Her color returned, her laughter came back little by little, and soon she was running around the yard again, chasing butterflies with that bright smile I thought I might never see again. Sarah and I clung to each other, whispering thanks to God. But in my heart, I knew that Lady in Blue had something to do with it too. When the statue was finally restored, the town gathered in the square. It stood there again, not flawless but scarred and whole at the same time. Luis had done his work with care, and you could still see the cracks, but somehow they made her more real, more human. People brought flowers, candles, and prayers once more, and this time I didn't stand at a distance or climb onto the pedestal with anger. I knelt among them, my hand resting on the base, my lips whispering words I never thought I'd say. "Holy Mary, pray for me." The people didn't cheer, they didn't gasp, they simply prayed alongside me. And in that moment, I knew something had shifted forever. I wasn't the same preacher they had once followed, and maybe I never would be again. But I was finally a man learning how to be small, how to be honest, how to let grace mend what my pride had broken. And somehow, that was enough. After the statue was raised again, I thought peace would settle over the town like a warm blanket. But that was wishful thinking. The truth is, scars do not vanish overnight, not from wood and not from people's hearts either. Forgiveness is not some instant miracle. It is more like rain soaking into hard ground, slow, steady, unseen at first. Some neighbors began to smile at me again, but others still turned away. I could feel the weight of their judgment even in the smallest places, like the grocery store checkout line or when I pumped gas. Their silence said more than words ever could. "We remember what you did." And they were right. I remembered too, every single day. My sermons changed after all of that. I used to shout and pound my fist, trying to force heaven down into people's ears. Now, I spoke softer, almost like I was speaking to myself. I talked about mercy more than judgment, about listening more than preaching. Some folks said they liked this new tone. Others whispered that I had gone soft, that I had lost the fire. Maybe they were right, but I knew one thing for certain: the old fire had burned too many bridges, and I did not want to live with that kind of smoke choking me anymore. Emma's recovery gave me hope, but it also left me restless. I could not explain her visions of the lady in blue, but I also could not deny them. Part of me wanted to call it imagination, a child's way of coping with sickness. Another part of me, the part that fingered that rosary every night, knew better. Something bigger than me had stepped into our home, and I had no right to push it away. One evening, Sarah caught me sitting on the porch, staring at the fading sunset with the rosary dangling from my hand. She sat beside me, brushing her hair back with that tired but patient look she always carried. "You've changed," she said softly. "Good or bad?" I asked. "Different," she replied. "Maybe both." but I'll take it. I was afraid I was losing you." Her words cut deep, because I realized she had been right. For years, I had been so consumed with being right, with winning battles no one asked me to fight, that I had nearly lost the people who loved me most. I squeezed her hand, promising myself that whatever came next, I would not let pride run our lives anymore. The real test came a few weeks later when the town council invited me to a meeting. I half expected them to strip me of my position, maybe even ask me to step down as pastor. I walked in with my head bowed, bracing for anger. Instead, the mayor cleared his throat and said, "Pastor, the town is divided. Some folks feel betrayed, others feel healed. We need you to help us move forward." Those words hit me like a hammer, but in a different way than before. They were not asking me to lead like I had before, with shouting and fire. They were asking me to listen, to guide, to bring broken people together. And truth be told, I did not know if I was strong enough for that. I took a breath, stood up and said, "I do not have all the answers. I do not even know if I deserve to stand behind that pulpit anymore. But if you will have me, I will do my best to serve this town, not with pride, not with force, but with humility." The room stayed quiet, but I noticed a few nods. It was not full acceptance, but it was a start. That night I walked home under the streetlights, my thoughts heavier than the humid air. I paused at the pedestal again, the statue standing tall against the night sky. The cracks in her face caught the moonlight, and for the first time I did not see brokenness. I saw resilience. Kneeling there, I whispered, "I still do not understand you. I do not know what role you are meant to play in my life. But I know this. My daughter smiled again because of you. My wife believes again because of you. And I am still standing because of you. For that, I am grateful." The words surprised me. They slipped out naturally, without calculation, without fear. For once, I was not trying to control God or people or symbols carved in wood. I was just being honest. As I rose to my feet, a strange calm settled in me. The town might never fully trust me again, and maybe I would never fully understand the mysteries that had shaken my life. But one truth was clear. Grace had cracked me open in the very place where pride had hardened me. And through those cracks, light was finding its way in. The next morning, Emma woke up humming softly, a tune I didn't recognize, but that filled the kitchen with light. She sat at the table, her little feet swinging as she picked at her cereal, and I realized I hadn't felt this kind of ordinary joy in years. The ordinary things, the smell of toast, the clink of spoons on bowls, the sunlight spilling across the linoleum, felt miraculous now. Sarah watched her daughter with that same tender look, the one that had carried us through countless sleepless nights. She caught my gaze and smiled faintly. The kind of smile that carried reassurance, warning, and hope all at once. I knew she was thinking the same thing I was. Emma, is healing wasn't just physical. Something deeper had shifted inside our family. I left the kitchen early, pretending I was heading to the office, but I really needed a walk. I wandered through the quiet streets of Marietta, the heat pressing down like it had done every summer, but with a lighter sense now. The air seemed softer, the sky a little bluer, and even the faded paint on the old houses seemed like it had been kissed by forgiveness. When I reached the square, I stopped at the pedestal again. The statue gleamed under the morning sun, not perfect, not pristine, but alive with a quiet dignity. Children were playing nearby, their laughter rising and falling like small bells, and I realized the town was slowly reclaiming this place, not because I had repaired it, but because people had chosen to participate in its restoration. I knelt there, letting the rosary slip through my fingers. Memories flooded back, the candlelit prayers of my grandmother, the whispered comforts of my mother, the small acts of love I had overlooked for too long. I understood then that the real restoration had happened not in wood or paint, but in the hearts of everyone who had touched this space with patience, care, and humility. A shadow fell across the pedestal. I looked up to see Sister Catherine standing there, her hands folded, her eyes warm but serious. "You've learned something," she said softly. "But the lesson isn't over. The town, your family, yourself, you're all works in progress. Don't stop tending to them." I nodded, understanding more than I could articulate. She didn't need to explain anything else. She had seen enough, and I could feel the weight of that quiet judgment and blessing all at once. Days turned into weeks, and the rhythms of life slowly returned. I began to see faces in the congregation I hadn't seen in months. They came cautiously, some curious, some skeptical, all silently observing the man who had once broken their sacred space. I didn't lecture or demand forgiveness. I simply listened, preached about mercy and grace, and let the presence of shared humanity fill the gaps where pride had once stood. At home, evenings became rituals of gratitude. Emma would tell me about her adventures with the lady in blue, and I listened without skepticism, without fear. Sarah and I began to rebuild our bond too, brick by careful brick, learning to communicate without defensiveness, without the need to always be right. One Sunday afternoon, I found myself back at the pedestal again. Emma tugged my hand, insisting I watch her place a single white flower in front of the statue. She did it with all the seriousness of a priest performing a sacred rite. I knelt beside her, letting her small hand guide me. For the first time in years, I felt the weight of humility without shame. The town, slowly, imperceptibly, was healing alongside us. People began to leave flowers, notes, and small acts of kindness at the base of the statue. No one made a fuss about it, no announcements, no photographs, just small, deliberate gestures that reminded me of what real faith looks like. Patience, love, and persistence. I realized then that the statue was never just about wood or faith. It was about the space we choose to leave for grace, even after we've broken it. And in that quiet, steady rhythm, I understood the most important truth I had learned over the past months. Redemption is not a moment. It is a practice. It is daily, subtle, and messy, and it is always possible if we are willing to bend, kneel, and try again. That night, I prayed differently than I ever had before. Not with words crafted for perfection, not with demands or arguments. I prayed simply, holding the rosary in my hands, letting the beads slip through my fingers one by one, and whispered, "Help me to see, to love, and to be present, even when it's hard, even when I fail, even when I don't understand." And somewhere between the quiet night and the steady rhythm of my breathing, I felt the first true answer. The days that followed felt quieter but not empty. Emma's laughter returned fully to our home, and with it a sense of normalcy I hadn't realized I'd missed so desperately. She chased butterflies in the yard, drew pictures of the lady in blue, and even asked questions I couldn't immediately answer, but that was okay. I didn't need to have all the answers anymore. At church, the congregation began to change too. People came to listen, yes, but also to share their own struggles, their own failures, and their own small moments of grace. I stopped trying to lead with certainty. Instead, I listened. I asked questions. I invited people into conversations about mercy, not judgment. Slowly, I began to see the kind of community I had long preached about, but never truly witnessed. One where vulnerability was strength, and humility was courage. One afternoon, a young mother approached me after service. Her eyes were red from crying, but there was hope there too. She handed me a folded note and said, "I thought you should have this." It was a simple message, written in careful handwriting. "Thank you for not giving up. You taught us that even broken things can be made whole." I folded the note, feeling the weight of every word pressing gently against my chest. It wasn't praise I wanted, it was confirmation that something deeper was shifting. That even in failure, even in moments of destruction, grace could still work its quiet magic. At home, Emma continued to thrive. She insisted on bedtime stories every night, not the usual tales of princes and dragons, but stories of people who forgave, who tried again, who healed. I realized that in telling these stories, I was learning to live them too. One evening, as we all sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and orange, Emma whispered, "Daddy, can I draw the lady in blue for the statue?" I nodded, and she ran inside, returning with her little sketchbook. She drew the statue with a smile, stars scattered across the mantle, cracks visible but somehow beautiful. She looked up at me and said, "See, Daddy, she's happy now." And for the first time in years, I felt a sense of peace so profound it took my breath away. Not because the statue was restored perfectly, not because I had been forgiven fully, but because I could finally see that love, the kind that survives destruction and thrives in small gestures, was enough. Weeks later, the town held a small gathering at the square. There were no banners, no speeches, just neighbors quietly coming together. Some brought flowers, others quietly knelt, and a few simply stood watching the statue with reverence. I stood among them, holding Emma's hand, feeling Sarah at my side. I realized then that the pedestal, once a symbol of anger and division, had become something else entirely. A testament to resilience, to community, and to the quiet power of redemption. The cracks in the statue mirrored the cracks in our lives. Visible, undeniable, but they no longer felt like failures. They were reminders that beauty often emerges from brokenness, that love can rebuild even when all else seems lost. That night, as Emma slept soundly, I knelt beside her bed, the rosary still wrapped around my wrist. I whispered a prayer, not perfect, not rehearsed, but true. "Thank you," I said simply, "for her, for us, for this town, for teaching me to bend without breaking, to forgive and to be present." And in that quiet moment, I felt it, the soft, steady presence of grace. Not a sudden miracle, but a gentle, constant one, flowing through the cracks, filling the empty spaces, teaching me that life, like the statue, like my family, like this town, was always capable of being made whole again. The story wasn't over, but for the first time, I knew we could keep writing it together. One small act of care at a time, one prayer at a time, one moment of forgiveness at a time. And that, I realized, was enough. Morning came with a warmth that felt different than usual, the kind that seeps into your bones and makes you realize life isn't just surviving, it has moving forward. I found myself walking past the park again, the empty pedestal staring back at me, but this time it didn't feel heavy, it felt like an invitation. I carried the rosary in my pocket, its beads pressing softly against my hand, reminding me that trust mattered more than perfect words, more than sermons, more than explanations. Neighbors were stirring, cautiously nodding as I passed. I returned their gestures with a simple smile. No excuses, no lectures, just acknowledgement. It was strange and humbling to feel accepted without proving anything. Some still kept their distance, but there was no longer anger burning in their eyes. Only curiosity, maybe even hope. Later that morning, Sister Catherine arrived at the church, carrying a small box of tools and scraps of cedar. Her hands shook slightly as she set the box down, but her eyes held the same quiet determination I had come to trust. "It's time," she said softly, "not to fix what's broken perfectly, but to bring it back together." Together. We worked slowly. I didn't lead, I only helped where I could. Maria, the young artist from the convent, guided us in carving new fragments, while neighbors sanded, polished, and held pieces steady. Each touch felt sacred, a silent prayer offered in wood and glue. I kept thinking of Emma and of every woman in my life who had taught me love without conditions, and it grounded me. A teenager named Luis asked me one afternoon, while carefully sanding the Virgin's robe, "Do you really think she forgives you?" I paused, watching him trace the cracks with care. "I think she already did," I said quietly. "Now I just need to forgive myself." It was harder than I expected. Every mistake, every harsh word, every hammer blow that had shattered the statue felt like a confession I couldn't escape. But with each piece we restored, I felt a little lighter, a little more human, a little more whole. Days bled into weeks. The sun rose and set over the square, and slowly the statue began to take shape again. Some fragments were gone forever, replaced with newly carved wood. Stars on her mantle were repositioned, creating a constellation that didn't exist before. Each imperfection told a story of fracture, repair, and patience. When the final coat of stain dried, I found myself standing at the edge of the square, the box of tools gone, the work done. Sister Catherine handed me the cord to lift the veil. My hands trembled, not from fear, not from shame, but from reverence. The town gathered quietly, whispers and soft murmurs filling the air. No speeches, no music, just anticipation. I drew a deep breath and pulled the veil. The cloth fell like morning mist. Gasps echoed as the sunlight caught the statue's restored face. The cracks were visible, the hands slightly reshaped, the stars rearranged, but she was whole. More than that, she was alive in a way that mattered, not perfect, but real. People bowed their heads, some crossed themselves, others wept quietly. I knelt at the base, the rosary slipping over my fingers, and whispered a prayer of surrender. No words needed to explain, no sermon needed to justify. Only presence, gratitude, and the acknowledgement that grace had arrived through broken hands and willing hearts. When I finally stood, the faces looking at me weren't judgmental anymore. They were softened, open, curious, like they were learning forgiveness alongside me. And for the first time in a long time, I believed it was possible, not just for the statue, not just for me, but for the whole town. Later that evening, as Emma slept, Sarah and I sat together on the porch. The air smelled like warm earth and flowers. She leaned against me, quiet, letting the day sink in. "It's beautiful," she whispered. I nodded, thinking of all the fragments, all the repairs, all the small acts of care that had brought us here. It was beautiful, yes, but not because of perfection, because of persistence, because of love, because of grace. And somewhere inside me, I felt it, the quiet certainty that even the most broken things could be made new if only we were willing to try. Days turned into weeks, and life at the Rivers house settled into a quiet rhythm that felt almost sacred. Emma was laughing again, chasing butterflies in the yard, asking endless questions about everything she saw. Each morning, when sunlight poured through the window, it no longer carried the weight of worry, but a gentle reassurance that life could go on. I found myself walking past the park daily, not out of guilt, not to atone, but because the empty pedestal had become a mirror of something inside me, a space where loss and hope met. I'd pause, sometimes place a hand on the stone, feeling the warmth of the sun and the whisper of wind. It was silent, but it was enough. One morning, Sister Catherine showed up at the front door again, carrying a small cardboard box wrapped in white linen. She didn't speak at first, just held it out. "We've kept them," she said softly. "All the pieces we could find. Maybe it's time." I stared at the fragments inside, splintered cedar, broken stars, a cracked hand, and felt a knot in my chest. "I can't," I whispered. The truth was, I didn't know if I could face the town, face the shame, face the memory of what I had done. "You don't have to do it alone," Sister Catherine said, "and you don't have to do it perfectly." Her words were enough to push me forward. We began slowly, carefully. Volunteers came, neighbors, some from my church, some not, offering hands, tools, time. Everyone had a reason, a desire to rebuild something broken, a chance to witness grace in action, or simply a need to be part of something larger than themselves. I worked quietly, listening, holding pieces steady, sanding rough edges. Maria, the young sculptor from the convent, guided us in carving replacements for what was lost. Each fragment we touched felt like a confession, a prayer, a small act of redemption. The town, once fractured by my mistake, slowly came together around the statue, and with it, around me. One afternoon, a teenager named Luis asked, while carefully smoothing the robe of the Virgin, "Do you really think she forgives you?" I paused, watching him trace the cracks, the broken lines. "I think she already did," I said. "Now I just need to forgive myself." Weeks passed. We worked in quiet concentration, sun rising and setting over the square. The statue slowly took shape. Some parts were new, carved fresh from wood. Some stars shifted, creating constellations that had never existed before. Imperfection, I realized, didn't take away from its power. It gave it meaning. Finally, the restoration was done. The town gathered in silence, curiosity and anticipation hanging in the air. Sister Catherine handed me the cord to lift the veil. My hands trembled, not from fear, but reverence. I drew a deep breath and pulled. The cloth fell like morning mist. Gasps swept through the crowd. The statue, restored but still bearing its scars, stood in the sunlight. Its cracks were visible, its hands slightly reshaped, the stars rearranged, yet it was whole. People bowed, crossed themselves. Some wept quietly. I knelt at the base, rosary in hand, and whispered a prayer, not for forgiveness, not for absolution, just presence and gratitude. When I finally stood, the faces watching me weren't tight with judgment anymore. They were softened, curious, open. And for the first time, I believed that forgiveness could be real, not just for me, not just for the statue, but for everyone who had been touched by what was broken and then made whole. Later, back at home, Emma slept peacefully. Sarah and I sat together on the porch, watching the town settle into quiet evening. The air smelled of warm earth and late summer blooms. "It's beautiful," she said. I nodded. It was beautiful, not because of perfection, but because of persistence, because of love, because of grace. And somewhere inside me, I felt it, the quiet truth that even the most broken things could be made new if only we were willing to care for them. In the weeks after the restoration, the pedestal didn't feel empty anymore. It felt alive, even if the statue wasn't perfect. People still came by, but now they paused with quiet reverence, leaving little flowers or notes tucked into the cracks. It was strange how something broken could hold so much life. I found myself walking past more often, sometimes stopping just to touch the stone, tracing the lines where repairs had been made, imagining all the hands that had helped rebuild it. Inside the house, life had shifted too. Emma laughed again, fully herself, her small face alive with color and energy. She asked questions non-stop about clouds, the birds, the butterflies, the lady in blue. Each answer I gave felt like a stitch, sewing the fabric of normal life back together. Sarah and I moved slowly, carefully, learning how to breathe without the constant edge of fear. I kept the rosary Mrs. Valdez had given me close. Some nights, I'd sit beside Emma's bed in the dark, letting the beads slip through my fingers, remembering all the women who had loved me without needing to be right, without needing to prove anything. My grandmother, my mother, the nuns, Mrs. Valdez, each memory carried a weight that wasn't to guilt but longing for something pure I'd almost forgotten. One afternoon, Sister Catherine appeared at our door again, carrying a small box. Inside were fragments of the original statue, pieces we hadn't been able to recover at the park. "We kept them," she said quietly. "Maybe now we know why." I stared at the broken pieces, feeling a surge of panic and hope at the same time. I wanted to refuse, but I didn't. I wanted to hide from the shame, but I couldn't. Slowly, carefully, with the help of volunteers, neighbors, anyone willing to give time, we began the final work. We sanded, glued, and recarved. Some parts were completely new. The stars on her mantle didn't shine the same. They were scattered differently, and I realized that was okay. Perfect wasn't the point anymore. Presence was. Finally, the day came to unveil her. The whole town gathered quietly in the square. Sister Catherine handed me the cord. My hands shook, but not from fear. I felt something heavier, something sacred. I pulled, and the white linen fell away. Gasps rippled through the crowd. There she was, restored, cracked, imperfect but whole. The cracks caught the light, the new hand was slightly different, the stars formed new constellations. She was real, alive in a way that mattered more than perfection ever could. Tears streamed down faces. Some crossed themselves, some whispered prayers in Spanish, some just stood silently. I knelt at the base, clutching the rosary, whispering words I didn't need to speak aloud. There was no sermon, no justification, no explanation, just presence, just acknowledgement, just a man learning that grace could be bigger than shame. As I rose, the faces in the crowd looked at me differently. They weren't angry anymore. Not all of them were fully trusting yet, but the sharp edges had softened. The town was healing in small, subtle ways. People smiled at each other more, spoke with gentleness, paused before judging, and at the center of it all, I realized, was a man who had stopped trying to be right and started learning how to be whole. Back home, Emma slept peacefully, her chest rising and falling without struggle. Sarah and I sat together, hands intertwined, watching the sun set. Emma had seen the lady in blue, and I had seen her too, not in visions, but in the courage, love, and forgiveness that had brought the town together. For the first time in weeks, the house was quiet in a way that didn't press against the ribs, that didn't make me hold my breath. Life had returned, not perfect, not predictable, but alive, soft, and real. And in that quiet, I understood something deep and simple. Even the most broken things, if treated with care, patience, and love, could be made beautiful again. Days turned into weeks, and life slowly settled into a rhythm we hadn't known in a long time. Emma's laughter filled the house again, and I watched her run in the yard, chasing butterflies or talking to the clouds as if she could see something the rest of us couldn't see. Sarah and I fell into quiet routines, sharing small smiles, checking on each other without words, letting relief settle over us like a warm blanket. The fear that had consumed every corner of our lives felt distant now, a shadow that couldn't reach us anymore. The pedestal in the town square, now restored with the statue, became a subtle heartbeat of the community. People stopped and left flowers, whispered quiet prayers, or just lingered in the shade nearby. No one needed to speak loudly. The presence of what had been broken and then made whole was enough. I walked past often, sometimes touching the stone, sometimes just standing, thinking about how fragile things can be and how forgiveness, like glue, holds even shattered hearts together. One afternoon, I saw a small boy approach the pedestal, eyes wide with curiosity. He laid down a tiny rock, then stepped back, unsure of himself. His grandmother followed, gently guiding his hand, and I realized that this simple act, this moment of passing reverence, was exactly what all of it had been for. Healing isn't dramatic, it's subtle. It's in the way small hands learn to honor what came before. At home, nights grew quieter in a new way. Emma slept without fever, without struggle. I kept Mrs. Valdez's rosary around my wrist, letting the beads slip through my fingers while I watched over her. The memories of my grandmother, my mother, all the women who had quietly loved me, came back more clearly than ever. Their patience, their grace, their forgiveness, everything I had once tried to argue with, dismiss, or destroy, I now carried with me in a way I couldn't have before. Sister Catherine came by again, bringing the fragments we had gathered of the original statue. With the help of volunteers, neighbors, townspeople, anyone willing to give time, we carefully restored what we could. Some pieces were carved from scratch, some glued, some sanded into place. It wasn't perfect, it didn't have to be. The cracks and small differences told the story of what had happened, of the wounds that had been endured, of the care that had gone into mending it. The unveiling was simple, quiet. The town gathered under the soft morning sun. I held the cord Sister Catherine gave me, my hands trembling, but not with shame or fear. I pulled, letting the white linen fall away. Gasps spread across the crowd. The statue stood restored, cracked in places, slightly different in others, but whole, present, real. I knelt at the base, the rosary in my hands, whispering words that felt too heavy and too light at once. There was no sermon, no justification, no explanation, just presence, just acknowledgement, just a man learning to accept grace bigger than himself. The cracks caught the light. The stars on her mantle weren't exactly like before. The new hand, the subtle differences. They were perfect in their imperfection. The town watched, faces softened, some crossed themselves. Some whispered prayers in Spanish, some in English. Some just stood quietly, letting the moment sink in. The anger and judgment that had burned so sharply in the weeks before were gone. Now there was a quiet curiosity, a gentle hope. The world hadn't changed dramatically, but something subtle had shifted. Forgiveness had begun to grow, not just in me, but in all of us. Back home, Emma slept deeply, her chest rising and falling in perfect rhythm. Sarah and I sat together, holding hands, watching the sun cast golden light across the room. Emma had seen the lady in blue. I had seen her too, not in visions, but in the courage, love, and forgiveness that had brought the town together. For the first time in weeks, our house was quiet in a way that didn't press against the ribs, that didn't make us hold our breath. Life felt alive again, soft and real. Even in the days after the restoration, the town continued to heal. People walked past the pedestal with gentle care. Flowers appeared without ceremony. Children learned to honor something larger than themselves, even if they didn't fully understand why. Conversations were softer, judgments paused before being spoken. There was no dramatic miracle every day, but there was growth and healing and presence, and I finally understood that even the most broken things, if handled with care, patience, and love, could be made beautiful again. The weeks turned into months, and life in Marietta began to breathe again. The town square no longer carried the weight of broken wood and shattered faith. It carried a quiet reminder of resilience. The statue of Our Lady of Guadalupe stood tall once more, her cracks visible, her hands steady, a symbol of everything that had been lost and carefully restored. I still walk past the pedestal, sometimes with Emma by my side, sometimes alone. She tugs at my hand, pointing out the flowers, the tiny notes left by neighbors, the small whispered prayers offered with no eyes watching. I kneel sometimes, tracing the cracks in the wood with my fingers, feeling the history, the pain, the forgiveness embedded there. Sarah smiles more easily now. Her presence is steady, warm, and patient. We speak softly, honestly, without the weight of unspoken fear. We've learned to let silence carry its own grace. Emma laughs, her chest full, her cheeks rosy with health. She curls up with the rosary Mrs. Valdez gave me, whispering little prayers to the lady in blue, to the stars on her mantle, to something bigger than any of us. And I watch, not as a pastor preaching truth, but as a father learning the weight and beauty of faith, of mercy, of love that doesn't demand perfection. I've learned that even in destruction there is teaching, in anger there is reflection, in brokenness there is hope. And even when the world turns its back, even when voices of doubt rise in your own heart, grace is patient, silent, and unfailing. Standing before the statue one late afternoon, I feel her presence in the warmth of the sun, in the wind brushing my face, in the laughter of children across the square. I don't hear a voice. I don't need to. I feel it. I feel her waiting. gentle, forgiving, and enduring. And in that moment, I know that what was broken in me and my family in this town has been made whole, not perfectly, not without scars, but real, alive, and holy. I rise, dust off my hands, and walk back home. Emma runs to meet me, Sarah following close behind. We enter together carrying the quiet miracle of survival, of forgiveness, of a love bigger than our failings. Outside, the town hums with life again, ordinary, fragile, beautiful, and for the first time in a long time, I am at peace. The hammer lies forgotten in the garage, the rosary is always in my pocket, and the lady in blue. She waits, patient and eternal, reminding me that even when we break, we are never beyond being made whole.